and welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host, with a very special guest, a good friend, Raymond Arroyo, editor of Mother Angelica's Little Book of Life Lessons in Everyday Spirituality, published by Doubleday. Ray, great to have you here. Always great to see you here. Obviously, the EWTN news director, host of the world over, and I can say a good friend of mine for these last 10 years or so, and the biographer of Mother Angelica, and now you are coming back to the same subject, but in a different fashion. Yeah. What is this book, Little Book of Life Lessons in Everyday Spirituality?
Yeah, we should tell people, this is not the biography or a smaller version of the biography.
Okay, this is not the abridged version of the life or anything.
Okay. Well, look, when I was on book tour, so many people would come up and relate to me problems they had, questions they had, spiritual challenges they were facing in their own life. They had lost a spouse, they'd lost a child, and they asked me, could you please have Mother pray for me, and can you ask her fill in the blank. Everybody had these questions for Mother. And so I would go back, whenever I was back in Birmingham, I'd go tell Mother, please pray for this person, and I'd share with her the problems. Because of the stroke in 2001, speaking is very difficult these days for Mother, so she can't answer at length. So we came to an agreement, and it was something we had discussed, interestingly enough, when we were working on the biography, doing a collection of some of her teachings. So this was kind of an idea that had been fermenting for a while. Yeah, no, we were kicking this around because I suddenly realized there was this treasure trove of information that no one had ever seen before.
So were these material, these kind of expressions of Mother that featured in this book, were these pieces of your research as you were putting together a biography?
Yes. Well, I came across some of this. I didn't have time to listen to everything, but I knew it was there.
Listen to what? What do you mean listen to?
Let me tell you. There were recordings that Mother had recorded from the 1960s, clear to about 2001 when she had the stroke.
Like on reel-to-reel audio cassettes?
Started in reel-to-reel, then audio cassettes. Okay. And what these were private lessons that she had given to her nuns and to select laity. She led a Bible group. She gave speeches, hundreds of speeches around the country. All of these were recorded crudely. The sound is not great. You wouldn't want to broadcast them, but the fact is the content, I thought, when I went back and tried to rebuild and listen and see how did she come to these teachings that so many of us know now via television, what I discovered was, and I thought, this is going to be terribly repetitive, I probably shouldn't listen to it. When I listened to it again, I found this innovative, creative, very direct, practical advice and lessons, and the humor and great stories, some of which I had never come across, some of which she never revisited again.
So there's new things in here that people haven't heard from television or weren't reflected.
Most of this book, I can tell you, all of this comes from that period. Most of what's here, they've never heard before, and certainly has never been tapped into or arranged in this way.
So this is different than Mother's mini books then, right?
Absolutely. The mini books are something entirely different. In fact, God forgive me, I'm not a big fan of the mini books because they don't reflect Mother's spirit. They were heavily edited by Sister Rayfield, who was a dear friend of hers, and to my mind, they never reflected the spirit. When you read them, you don't hear Mother Angelica. This is raw. Right. This is Mother Angelica unplugged. This is for direct and spontaneous, and you'll hear where some teachings came from: living in the present moment, trusting God's will at every moment, dealing with pain and suffering, struggling with trials. It's a very practical. I phrase this and put it into the context of a how to live a life in full devotional. That's how I kind of see this book.
Did you come up with, there's 14 different categories, you alluded to some of those. Are those ones that you yourself put together? Was that an editor's decision?
That was my decision as editor of the work. One of the things
That's right, you are editor.
Yeah, of this I am. There was no work that existed today, a single volume where you could get a kind of flyover of Mother Angelica's major teachings in one volume that was pithy, concise, captured her spirit, and yet had such wisdom and depth. And I think when you look here, everyone who's read it has been so moved by it. And the reason I wrote it was to answer all those people I met on the road who wanted answers from her now. Now you have those answers direct from her. Like Marky Works.
Who's Marky Works?
Marky Works is a woman I met in Chicago, a viewer of the network. And Marky had a serious struggle with drugs and alcohol, and her mother was essentially assassinated by an uncle when she was 18 months. So she had a very tough life. And she's flipping channels one night, she says, contemplating suicide. And she comes across this nun, and she said, oh, I need this like a hole in the head. And she flipped the channel off. But she came back to her because something Mother Angelica was saying arrested her attention. And you and I have heard over these 10 years countless stories like this.
Right.
But Marky Works is just one of, I think, thousands of people who have been touched, maybe millions this way. And Marky says when she heard her one night, a woman called in and said, I'm estranged from my mother. My mother's very ill. She's dying now, and I don't feel I can make peace with her. And Mother Angelica leaned into the camera and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be your mother now." And Marky was arrested by that moment. She began watching and tuning into Mother Angelica every week as a spiritual mother, going to this woman who now became her spiritual lifeline. And she found there a rediscovery of her faith, a way out of drugs, eventually a family. And today, Marky has children and an intact family, and she credits all of that to this little nun that she flipped by in the middle of the night. So the teachings of Mother have such power, and I wanted to tap into that, and that's what this collection really embodies.
In the introduction, you say, in her lessons, she sought to apply traditional Christian spirituality to the confused, complex world she knew all too well. Her teachings pulsed with a practical simplicity, an earthy humor, and a beguiling wisdom that would draw many eyes and hearts. So why was the genius that you see in here, that you saw in the biography as you went through it, why did she have the ability to take these things from a confused, complex world, growing up in a fairly confused environment herself, and make them so simple and relatable to people?
Mother Angelica came from the street, and she learned through the school of hard knocks. I mean, she saw the ugly underbelly, I think, of the world, growing up in Southeast Canton, being abandoned by her father at 5, living with a mother who was emotionally unstable, and herself going through some of the difficulties that she would later help her viewers out of, the world that she saw her mother sinking into, depression, suicidal tendencies. Mother understood all of that, the pain and the suffering in the world, and then took it on in her own body. I mean, with the being crippled, the diabetes, these challenges were not something that Mother Angelica considered theoretically. She knew it because she'd lived it.
So it was real for her.
Authentic as they come. She shot straight from the hip, and there was no attempt to prove how authentic her lessons were, because she knew these lessons were authentic. She had lived them. And that's what I think it is when people flip by in the middle of the night or during the day and they hear this woman. And I've heard this from Jews, agnostics, Orthodox, Protestants, and Catholics. She has this universal appeal because she's authentic, she's real, and what she's giving is the gospel embodied. She lives it. And the beauty of this book, I always tell people, so many people are impressed by her story, and they were just blown away by it. They couldn't imagine how this little broken girl created this enormous media organization that now reaches the whole world with hope and love and and the gospel message. And my experience is, you've now read the life of Mother Angelica. This is the lifeblood. Right. These are the thoughts and the ideas and the wisdom and the prayers and the life lessons that fueled her journey. And if you want to live a life in full, this is really how you do it.
Well, what's amazing about what you said and the universality is that even in other languages, when you put Mother, take it and dub her into Spanish, it's just amazing the reaction people have. She just transcends all barriers, whether it's intellectual barriers or barriers by language or anything. She just has the ability to transcend. Now, you say that she still remains a cultural force. What do you mean she's a cultural force?
I mean, just what you're saying. Even though she's off air, and I think that's what that comes out of, even though now she's in reruns, essentially, and the devotional spots, she's a cultural force in that when people tune in, they see her as very relevant. And it is a paradox, isn't it, that today an 84-year-old woman, a cloistered nun no less, should be one of the most relevant Catholic figures and religious figures, forget Catholic figures, religious figures on the scene today in America and around the world. That's pretty compelling and amazing stuff. And I think it runs, again, to that message of authenticity. There are few leaders who have that, and she does.
Now, you describe this as like having a sit-down with Mother Angelica. So in a sense, were you trying to replicate, in a sense, your one-on-one meetings with her, in a sense of...
I was. Okay. And not only mine. Her nuns, I think co-workers here at the network, there were people in her circle of friends from 30 years ago, Jean Morris and others, who had the opportunity. And look, I was blessed. After the live show, we'd do the show together. We'd go to one of the guest houses here and, over Nutter Butters and tea. In between interviewing, I would tell her, I need your help on something, and I'd share with her something that was happening in my life. And she always would come up with these practical little nuggets, little lines that would just sink in, about pain, about your enemies. There's a great line. I put it in the book. Some of these are actual things she told me. Others are extracted from her nuns or from her friends. But I interviewed people who I knew were in her inner circle to get their favorite lines, their favorite advice and wisdom from Mother, and incorporated that into the other more formal things that she gave to groups. She told me this. She said, do you know why the Lord says, love your enemy, sweetheart? She said, because your enemy does something your friends don't do. Your enemy, which means a person who bugs you, has the power to bring something out in you that is not like Jesus. When they walk into the room, you're already disturbed. She said, it shows that there's something in you that lacks love and gentleness. Don't say if it wasn't for that person, you could be holy. No. You can be holy because of that person. Right. That person is making you holy, right. Making you choose the good, making you like Jesus.
Right.
She told that to me. You can imagine what the context was.
I have some general idea. Mm-hmm. But you know, in going through this work, I did see that quote, and I thought that was a very powerful quote that she had. I remember the only one that I can remember myself was where she referenced someone had asked her for help, and she said, you don't need me, you need St. Jude, which I always thought was a pretty insightful statement at the time she had. But you say that you kind of break things into digestible chapters, but you say, be forewarned, this is a devotional like none other. Mm-hmm. What do you mean it's a devotion like none other?
It's a devotion like none other because, as my editor at Doubleday said, you know, this is tough love. And it is. This is not honeyed sweet words to kind of make you feel good. We get a lot of that on television today. I mean, I was watching a televangelist the other day, and he was, you know, if you only have positive thoughts, the Lord will bless you. Well, there's a lot of people with positive thoughts who are in stage 4 cancer or children who are dying or with serious handicaps. Does that mean God doesn't love them enough?
Right, or being blamed for their problems.
Exactly.
As if it's you don't have enough faith or something.
And you know, there's no one on the scene today, Doug. Honestly, there's no book like this out there. Or I wouldn't have gone through the trouble of assembling it. The thing I love about Mother is she's real world. She doesn't blame you for the challenges God puts in your life. She helps you to spiritualize them and find a way out of that dark place. It doesn't mean you're going to get health and wealth and be happy as can be. Some of the saints weren't such happy characters. That's not what it's about. It's like the first line in the book, which I got from one of her nuns. She would always say to people, you know, about the eternal judgment, the final judgment that awaits us all. She said, everybody drags his own carcass to market. That's a great
So be careful.
No, be careful.
So be careful.
And I like that idea. You know, she has a funny, quirky way of putting things. And I think it came from a mother, her mother, May David, who became Sister David later, May Rizzo, right. Who later became a nun, had this wonderful storytelling ability. She could spin a yarn, she could tell a tale. Everyone who knew her said she was hilariously funny. Mother got that gift. And the other part that she brought to the table was her personal suffering and being a contemplative, being in prayer 2, 3, 4 hours a day. That does something to a soul.
Well, referencing what you said before, seeing God, it is easier to see God in the sinner because I must make an effort to do so. It is one of the paradoxes of life that I run the risk of losing sight of God in those who are easy to love because I begin to seek my own good in them.
A lot to chew on there.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you find that, too, sometimes that she would say things on shows or even maybe something you read, and it was only later, either hearing it again or it popping into your mind, yet you kind of got it?
Right. It would sink in later. Yeah.
Right.
An experience would confront you. You said, she was right. And that happened all the time. The thing I wanted to do here was to capture her spirit unedited, uncensored, just lay it out there. In those chapters where if you're suffering from pain and suffering, go to the pain and suffering chapter. What we also have here for the first time are a lot of original prayers. And they comport with whatever the chapter is, dealing with faults. I always keep going back to pain and suffering because it's so important to her. Embracing risk. Right. Discerning God's will in your life.
Boldness.
Yeah, boldness. And
boldness should be the 11th commandment.
And she, believe me, that was one she practiced often, as you know. And there are prayers that accompany all this, including that novena, the famous novena that Rhoda Wise, the mystic in Canton, gave Mother
you have that in here,
as an 18-year-old girl, or a 19-year-old girl, that healed her of the stomach ulcer. That novena is published here for the first time.
We're all trying to get master's degrees, and so often we forget the master. This one, I think I remember this being referenced maybe in the biography. When you make a deal with God, be very specific.
Yep.
Was that in the biography?
Oh, yeah, it was in the biography.
Right.
Yeah, no, I pulled that line out. You'll remember she makes a deal with God after her spinal operation, right before it, rather. And she said, if you allow me to walk again, I'll build you a monastery in the south. And, well, she walked again with the crutches and the brace, and leading her to comment later, when you make a deal with God, be very specific. You know, and hey, that is marvelous counsel.
Here's one that struck me because of my own personal experience. The greatest power in the world the greatest power for good in this world is retarded children, the deaf, the dumb, and the blind, those who suffer loneliness. You talk about suffering, right? They have time to live with God, to experience the joy of God, to experience the presence of God, and their prayer is powerful before the Lord, and I can attest to that, I know personally.
Well, I when I heard her say that on one of those recordings, I thought, this should be in here, because this is, Mother Angelica, part of her appeal, I think, is speaking to those who are forgotten by everybody else. And there are a lot of very slick people running around, naming it and claiming it.
Right.
But what of the suffering souls who go through life truly united to God? And she had such a heart for them. In the book, people remember that last scene when we were in Lourdes, and this little retarded child is placed in her lap. And the communion she had with that baby, in that moment, these two suffering people, yet the joy that radiated between them. And when I saw that, heard that quote, it made me think of that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of grudges, she says, don't waste your time in life trying to get even with your enemies. The grave is a tremendous equalizer.
Tough love, Doug, tough love. Yeah, no, she's, Mother had that way of she never was afraid of pointing to death to remind us that, people are sometimes shocked by paintings of the saints, and you see the skull at the bottom of the corner of the painting. Well, that was to remind them and to remind us that death is really what this is all about, going into the next life. And this is only the wind-up. This is the rehearsal for what's to come. I think you see her trying to, again, she's trying to impose an eternal perspective on people. Wake up. You only have a little bit of time to do something for God,
Well, do you think also in these things, and I think it was always important with Mother Angelica to realize she's not talking also about other people as if these are all things that I do.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. She convicts herself throughout the book. You'll see that.
Right, exactly. And that these are things she herself might have struggled with.
Absolutely.
And continue to struggle
with. No.
Right?
There's a quote, I wish I could find it. I'll see if I can find it for you, where she says, here it is. This is a perfect example. The greatest gift God has given me since my vocation, she says, is pain, because I'm a proud individual. And with the apostolate God has given us and the work we must do, I need to be totally reliant on Him. And if I stand before a crowd for hours and beg God to give me strength for one more moment, if I can smile through that and make them laugh, then I've spiritually healed. Precisely because I have not been physically healed. What a great insight. We all think, and the world tells us, well, if you love God and you pray and you have real faith, you'll be healed. She's saying no. You might not be physically healed because you need spiritual healing to come from that experience.
Well, that's what St. Paul said, right?
You got it.
That his complaint.
Absolutely.
He kept praying and it wasn't. A thorn. If you're not a thorn in somebody's side, you're not doing Christianity right.
Mother could be the poster child for that thought. Yeah. It's not always easy to embody, reflect and embody and witness to the truth. And I think she certainly bore the wounds of one who stood up, was unafraid to speak the truth, and that's okay. I mean, what she's saying there is, we have to be willing and willing to accept the whips you might get from speaking.
Towards the end of the book, chapter 14, the last things, there's a couple of things in this section I thought were interesting. The power of the soul. Whenever I go to a wake, I always put my hand on the person's chest.
Yeah.
Well, why did she say that, do you think?
I think she was talking there about, she says it's a wonderful meditation on death. She said if you put your hand there, you feel how cold and empty this is. This body that we care for, we feed so well, we dress, we worry about what people think of us, or our hair going gray and all those things. But it doesn't really matter. The soul is what animates the whole body. And that's where she was going there. Again, Mother had this, and you know it from being around her, she had this eternal perspective that she carried with her all the time. It wasn't about what we were doing, what we were doing today and about tomorrow. It was about serving God in the present moment and perfecting your soul for Him, redeeming yourself through these experiences with His grace to get to where you were going. And that's, it's a little interesting, but you've got personal insights like that throughout the book that I'd never seen before.
I'm scared to death of dying and having the Lord say to me, Angelica, this is what you might have done had you trusted more. I'm petrified of that. And then she has a thing, dying with dignity, and this I thought was powerful. One of my sisters, Sister Immaculata, in fact, you still see her actually in the Rosary.
Yeah.
We have little sister Immaculata. She was so cute. Had a very progressive form of cancer. She was only 45. You know what she said before she died? She told me, all I want to do is to live whatever time I have left with Jesus and my sisters. I want to be able to say, as I am dying, thank you, Lord. That's dying with dignity and demonstrating holiness of life. We need to think of that. Because that's not the way the world would think about that
No,
situation
they don't consider
at all.
that dying with dignity. No, but that is dying
they have
with
another
dignity.
use for that
Yeah,
phrase,
no,
right.
they think dying for dignity is euthanasia.
Right.
Before your time. Again, I love the personal nature of all of this. It's accessible. You can flip it open and go to the section you need whenever those crises come upon you. But this is Mother Angelica up close. It really is like a sit-down. And since many of these insights and lines came from those of us who were with her at those tables, you're going to feel her and hear her voice, and I hope capture some of her spunky, impetuous spirit.
Oh, definitely, without wasted pain. Suffering in itself does not make us holy. It is only when we unite it out of love to the suffering of Christ that it has meaning. Suffering without love is wasted pain. Because I think sometimes people misunderstand this kind of suffering as if you're a masochist.
Right, and you want to invite it. And that's not – look, Mother Angelica was, taking her medications, going to the doctor every week. You mitigate the pain as best you can. But the fact is, once you're doing all you can, she's saying accept it, offer it to God, and it will have this supernatural value. And in case anybody doubts that, take a look at this channel every day. The only reason we're on, all of this came from her pain, came from her suffering. And I believe its sustenance is the terrible, at times very difficult to watch suffering that she's enduring now.
Even as we speak.
Yeah.
And of course, you talk about here near the end the near-death realization, you call it, in the summer of 2000. You can talk about the experience, kind of a near-death experience you had that I myself,
you remember,
as other people, I very much remember when it occurred and remembered seeing some of the impact that it seemed to have on Mother. And you say that she said, when you die, you are the love, the compassion you had in life. That's all you've got. I had a deep awareness of God, a deep awareness that we do not have here a lasting city. I never had anything happen so quickly. Be ready. Now, was that something she talked to you about? Where did that come from?
I think that came from an interview we did together right after that moment. And again, when we would talk, you see it's very personal. It's directed toward an individual. It's not general. That's what I love about all of these things. But they were that one struck me so. And I think it will strike many people. I mean, the woman is you look at this witness, and we look at Mother Angelica now as Mount Rushmore. She accomplished so much.
Chiseled in stone.
Exactly. And I mean, as her biographer, I don't want that to happen, because Mother's message is, we all have this available to us. If you're willing to take the shot, if you're willing to go out and give your life and to accept God's will in this present moment. And that's what she did. I love the risk. There's a whole chapter on discerning God's will, which for me was always, and continues to be, I think, a big question. How do you know what God's calling you to?
I think so many people, they talk about, where do I get a good spiritual director? It's one of the most often asked questions here at the network.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a great line. And it's one of my favorite lines. She said, people often ask me, how do you know whether something is God's will in your life? I say, ask me next year, and then we'll know whether it was God's will. The Lord isn't going to come down and say, now look, sweetie, I want you to do this little thing for me. He's not going to do that. He gave you a brain, He gave you a memory, an intellect, a will. Do you realize if you're a Christian, you have sanctifying grace in you? Part of God is in you. Pray, move forward in His grace, and you'll discover His will for you. That's, we all want that epiphany. We want to be knocked off our horse and told exactly what to do. It doesn't happen that way. It's through encounters with people. It's through sometimes the roadblocks you meet. And that's what I love about her story. It was filled with headaches and heartaches and people coming after her and, some of her own. And yet, God uses all of that if you're attentive to His will.
Right. And she says, no need for fear. She talks about people being fearful. Someone said to me, what will happen if you buy all this printing equipment and then you can't pay for it? And I said, I'll get 1 million books out before they take it back.
There it is. That's the gunslinger. And I love that part of her. Bold. It's typically Franciscan. Impetuous, bold, shameless. When she felt God was calling her to something, she didn't stop. And there's a whole chapter on this that I think will so appeal to people who are on the fence now. Right. Trying to figure out what to do. And you just
said it there, because it's what she thought when she thought that's what God wanted her to do. She never tried or got out in front of His will.
Nope. She never tested it. She never questioned it and ruminated on it. We look, all of us, most of us would sit down and do the pros and cons page and discuss it with 12 people. Angelica never did that. She knelt down, she prayed, she felt God was leading her, and she said, let's do it. We're going to do it and see what happens. That's how the biography happened. I went to her and said, I really want to work on this. Right. I'd like to do it like this. I'd like to do it like that. She said, all right, let's start and see what happens.
Right.
I said, I guess that's as much of a commitment as I'm going to get from you. Well, we'll see if it's God's will. That was it.
And what do you think about this book and how it's turned out and the reaction that you think this will have?
Honestly, I think this book is so practical and so needed now. There are so many hurting people and so much confusion out there. And I thought Mother's words and witness needed to be out there. I edited this book for the monastery, though. This is not my book. This is their book.
Right, and you thank all the sisters and the friars.
Well, it's their book. Right. And this was part of my thank you for their generosity and kindness in working on the biography. They didn't have to throw open the archives to me, but they did.
Right.
And
I think they made a good choice.
Well, I hope they did, but I think this is a good choice, too, in doing this for them. And it furthers their work, and I hope will draw many souls to Christ
definitely.
and to Mother.
And we look forward to what's in the future, Mr. Arroyo. Thank you so much. Raymond Arroyo, editor of Mother Angelica's Little Book of Life Lessons in Everyday Spirituality, published by Doubleday, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Look for Ray coming up on EWTN Live with Father Mitch next week. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on Bookmark.